Okay, friends, hi, and good evening here from Finland in the Temple of Silence, which is not always so very silent during the making of programs. But we've just been discussing, we have getting ready for you the program number 39 for the telepathy and the etheric vehicle. And at least pretty soon you'll either be getting the uploaded version that BL and Joe and Harold put in two different places, either Makara or YouTube, and then Michael will send out, Michael Gaeta will send out the this other version to some of the people who have requested that. It's just slightly different and has some words on the side, not all of which are correct, of course. Now, our glamour for today is the glamour of personality. It's not just the first-ray glamour, though a lot of first-ray people seem to fall victim to it. It's getting involved with the opponent of the angel of the presence, the opponent of the solar angel, angel of the presence, and falling into the constraints, the strictures, the restraints of the personality life when compared to what soul life might be like. In the telepathy book, DK deals a lot with that kind of contrast. So it's probably very interesting. We are, BL assures me, so I know I'm more or less correct. We're beginning on program 188, and it's reading 124. Our page is 202. We are not too far from the end of the book, but it will still take us a little while. So let's just make sure that everything is in order. It does appear to be. And let's see if there's any kind of segue that is needed. Well, everything is good. There's a beam he's talking about through the use of a conscious use of the will. It's carrying energy upon the beam of projected light. Let's see here. And to this, they add a persistent and steady focus, and this beam is projected, and then it has a twofold use. It expels dynamically, much as a strong wind blows away or dissipates a dense fog, or as the rays of the sun dry up and absorb the mist. I guess we're talking about methods of deglamorization. It acts also as a beam along which that which is new and a part of the divine intention can enter. The new ideas, well, the true ideas, of course, are coming from the Buddhic plane and beyond, but the new ideas and the desired ideals, which, may I add, are not selfish, come in on the beam. Just as the beam directs and brings in the airplanes to a desired landing place. Well, and think about how long ago this was written. So the next section on which we will concentrate today, and, I have to say it will be maybe a little easier of assimilation when compared to the seeds of the infinite identify as being program. That has its own problems in terms of language and what's really trying to be said there. But now we're right back into solid DK esotericism instead of deviating into a foreign land of identification, we might say. To us, identification is still a foreign land. I'm talking about the kind of identification that is a reflection of what the Christ, as the great expert in the art of identification, can accomplish. So let's go on with the Tibetan here. Oh, and by the way, of course, there are quite a number of us here now. Maybe I won't go through everybody who's here, but I just want to welcome you. Yeah. A lot of people that we're seeing fairly often, and I'm very grateful for your return appearance, as it were, and definitely grateful to BL and Michael here to keep me on the tracks, which is sometimes a little difficult. But we're learning, or I'm being taught, how to simplify the process, which is a definite help. So I won't go through all of the names that are here, but just to say, very happy to see you here. So, the Tibetan speaks, and I'll, read a few things that he is saying in this new section, which looks like it is taking off on the subject of the dissipation of individual glamour. Now, if we don't manage some kind of attainment that way, I wonder how we can be of much use when we approach world glamour. Well, we can't. It's as simple as that. We have to be able to handle, or at least recognize, some of our individual glamours. And let's not fall victim to the glamour of having no glamour. Glamour goes on for quite a while, and they are ever more subtle, difficult to recognize, difficult to deal with, even if the eventual mental focus, or sometimes called mental polarization, begins to obliterate our usual preoccupation with the astral plane. But I was just reading that DK says that the majority of aspirants really are subject to the glamours of the astral plane. And they have to have an increasing mental, soul-inspired focus in order to help obliterate the trap that such glamours present. I don't think there was one of the one of the students that were attracted to DK and which he had chosen as part of his project that didn't have glamours. All of them did. Even, I think, even Alice Bailey, even Roberto Assagioli, who were definitely initiate disciples, disciples of the third degree, definitely, and working towards other self-sacrificial possibilities, namely working towards the ability to take the fourth initiation. That's pretty high, you know. Some people who were so anxious to take it really were nowhere near being able to do that. But they thought they were, you know. So what DK has said that the beginner, though they weren't really beginners entirely, but the beginner is always more consciously conceited than the more experienced disciple. In other words, we don't have humility, we don't have that adjusted sense of right proportion. We simply think we have done more than we have. And so one has to be really watchful about that so as not to be swept away by the glamour of personality, thinking that the personality is ever so much more accomplished and compliant and aligned than it really is. And that's going to take some close self-observation, if you can stand it, if I can stand it. Okay. So going on with the Tibetan, let us first of all consider, he says, the mode by which the individual aspirant, that's us, okay, can succeed in dissipating the glamours which have, for ages, confronted his life in the three worlds. Well, why? Because, you know, if emotional polarization is the likelihood throughout the Atlantean period, and if we've all been here during the Atlantean period, that's true of the great majority of us, certainly. Maybe a few have come in from other places more recently, you know, some of the scientific types and so forth. Then we know what he's talking about. We have had our life conditioned by glamour for, goodness, millions of years as we labored in the hall of ignorance, where the higher of the pairs of opposites was not really known, and the lower of the pairs of opposites was that which commanded our attention. So, the individual aspirant can succeed in dissipating these. He has been, oh my goodness, this is a good proportion. Whoa. He has been dominated by desire for 4/5 of his incarnated experience. Now, let's say that incarnated experience began 21 million years ago, and 4/5 it's kind of like 84 divided by 5, which is kind of like 17, roughly, million years. Why glamour? It gives you pause to think, and why it should be so difficult, even for us who, believe what we are taught here, to be rid of these glamors, which are often hiding away from our internal realization. So that's a big statement. He has been dominated by desire for 4/5 of his incarnated experience. And when you think that those early petals in the hall of ignorance take so long to open, you can understand that a lot of this domination has occurred within the hall of ignorance. Just the very first petal alone is going to take millions of years to open. And the same with the second petal. And I don't have the figures, obviously, but a long time, and then less and less time. But the experience in the emotional petals, which is the second circle of petals, is not short. You have to travel from an egotistical, as we would say in our modern psychology, an egotistical, personal, individual point of view, all the way to being an initiate of the first degree. And that takes time. 3 big experiences there, 3 or 4. At first, you're just an egotist. Then you crash and burn. And then you begin saying, well, what's this possible higher life that I might live as one who aspires? And finally, your aspiration turns into the attainment of opening the 5th petal, which signals that you have taken the first initiation, maybe 4 steps there. Anyway, it's not quick. The quickest in the 9 petals are the 3 fire sacrifice petals. And I suppose, in a way, the synthesis petals burst open at a certain point in our experience. But I'm kind of arrested by this idea of dominated by desire for 4/5 of his incarnated experience. Now, maybe he's also including physical desire and not just astral desire, because the first petal is filled with physicality. And, well, in a way, the second petal is as well. They are all earth sign petals. So anyway, he has begun, our aspirant here, talking about ourselves, he has begun to transmute his desire into aspiration. Now, I'd like to suggest a sentence by the Tibetan, which I'll get more or less correct, that the highest type of aspirational idealism is found in Taurus. Now, does that surprise us? The highest form of aspirational idealism is found in Taurus, and thus connected with the second petal, or the emotional petal, in the hall of ignorance. But at that point, it will not yet be the highest form of aspirational idealism. We will have to somehow wait until a more advanced stage brings Taurus forward again. But anyway, as far as we are concerned, either as aspirants or disciples, we have begun to transmute desire into aspiration and to seek with all the devotion, emotion, and longing of which he is capable for realization. You can understand why the sixth ray is becoming very important, so I'm going to kind of add a color which is, I often think of as connected with the sixth ray, along with the rose color and sometimes the furious red of Mars. Well, nobody's here who has not transmuted desire to a certain extent into aspiration. What are we aspiring after? I mean, look, it's not easy to read the Tibetan. And yet, many of us, year after year, ponder over what he has said and are accepting him as our teacher, even though ultimately we might belong to K.H. or Moria or some other master. The Tibetan does have the great training ashram. So he has begun to transmute his desire into aspiration and to seek. This is so fervent, isn't it? With all devotion, emotion, and longing of which he is capable for realization. Now, that term realization can be used in a general way, or if we look at the particular cities or powers of which a man is capable, then on the fifth subplane, fifth from the top of the atmic plane, comes this city called realization. And it's of the same ilk, but even beyond divine vision of the astral plane. If you want to know where to get this, and probably many of you do know, then turn to about page 188 in a treatise on cosmic fire, and you'll see the senses and their higher correspondences. So we have to begin, apparently, with desire. And desire is all about putting the world, which has been fragmented in our perception, putting it back together, if the desire is of the right kind. Master Moria says, desire is a great cosmic principle. We have to use the right kind of desire. We have to co-measure our desire. Whenever you hear the word co-measure, think of a right proportion. Think of humility. So then the Tibetan goes on and says, it is then that he, that is our aspirant disciple, becomes aware of the appalling nature of the glamors in which he automatically and normally walks. Now, the Tibetan is not one who overstates things. He says what he says, and he means what he says. So I'll use that kind of rose color to indicate that it is very emotional. A lot of meditations involving the sixth ray are given by the Tibetan through the use of the color rose. Now, this is almost amusing. Appalling nature of the glamors, in which he automatically and normally walks. He doesn't even think about it. He's just in it. And I have to say, remembering that the Tibetan said that both he and Alice Bailey were horrified by glamour, though it was more recently. He says it may have been a long time since I personally succumbed to glamour, but more recently Alice Bailey has, but we're both of us horrified by glamour. Now, just pause for a moment. And why would it be that astute people in the esoteric field, appraising what glamour is, should be horrified by it? Does a good reason come to us for them to assess glamour as horrific? Well, you know, it's like if you want to go get stuck in the swamp, follow the swamp light. There's something called will-o'-the-wisp, and it's sometimes called earlicht, or the light of error. It's like swamp light. You follow it, you think you're going somewhere, and the next moment you realize that you are in quicksand, and maybe you just can't get out. That's what happens with glamour. It seems so appealing. I'm reminded of how, this channeling business, it didn't just start even was going on during World War I. Some of the German elite, high military people, were attending sessions in which a woman, I don't remember her name, but she was given a lot of credit, was channeling the superstar Aldebaran. Give me a break. Any sense of proportion would show the complete impossibility of there being any accuracy in that. And yet, that channeling was part of what guided a German response during the First World War. So it can lead to very bad places and lead us astray and delude us until we are lost. Now, let's go on a bit more because, as we go along, he just says things which tie many more obscure statements together. And then, of course, he offers still more obscure statements. Anyway, glamour arose. And I want to say not so much in the first petal. Okay. Glamour arose when man recognized and registered desire as an incentive. That sounds very Taurian, doesn't it? Thus, that word incentive is always used in connection with Taurus, thus demonstrating his humanity and his distinction from the animal, because it is the mind which reveals the existence of desire. So the instinctual effort to satisfy desire, innate and inherent in the lower nature, gave place to planned effort to meet desire, involving the directive use of the mind. And we might suggest that it's not the best use of the mind, but the mind becomes involved in helping with the fulfillment of such desires as there are. And thus, says the Tibetan, the line of demarcation between the animal and the human has become increasingly apparent, and the first and basic expression of pure selfishness appeared eons ago. And I guess we would have to say somehow in the petals of ignorance. It didn't end there, but I think it began there. So just to make this a little bolder, glamour arose when man recognized and registered desire as an incentive. Now, usually in the beginning, what we might call desire was tied to the physical appetites, but later it found its independence from the physical appetites, and people desired what is beautiful, let us say, beautiful to them. They began to desire contact with some transcendent being. Desire detached itself from the strictly physical appetites, which those appetites were very keen in the opening of the first petal. So, in doing this, he demonstrated his humanity and his distinction from the animal. Now, I have friends who say, hey, we're just animals, and doesn't really recognize a human kingdom per se, just animals, some more stupid and some brighter, like a human being, but just animals. Well, obviously, such individuals as believe that have not been trained in esotericism and wouldn't really accept it anyway. But this is interesting. The mind reveals the existence of desire. Otherwise, what do you have? You don't have sight. You just have response to desire. You hardly know what it is. It's just your way of living. You just have to have what you desire. And you don't see it. You don't evaluate it. You don't compare it in terms of the ladder of evolution, high and low. So, but although we began with instinctual effort to satisfy desire, such as we found very much in the Hall of Ignorance, along the first circle of petals, radiant energy, substance gathered and looking perhaps something like a petal. The instinctual effort, says the Tibetan, to satisfy desire, innate and inherent in the lower nature, gave way to the planned effort to meet desire through involving the directive use of the mind. Now, as I say, it's not necessarily the best use of the mind to make it the servant of desire, but it's natural, and we all pass through that. A higher vehicle basically becoming, for a while, the slave to a lower vehicle. And maybe we can think back on times in our life when we planned and calculated not to have light, not to have illumination, etc., but to make sure that our desires could be carried out. So what happened here? A man is distinguished from the animal because he recognizes his desires through the use of the mind. And also, what else happens? The pure selfishness, the basic expression of selfishness appears eons ago. So, number one, the line of demarcation becomes increasingly apparent between man and animal, and the first basic expression of pure selfishness also appears. Now, maybe we don't have too much anymore of that pure selfishness. It's tainted, well, by certain altruistic impulses, even among some of the worst people. They may be basically selfish, but maybe they love their children, or, the The wolf may hunt down others in a merciless manner, but he loves his own cubs and group and so forth. So pure selfishness is hard to find, but there are some cases where people are just all wrapped up in themselves. And you just are surprised, given, let's say, oh my gosh, think about Abraham Lincoln. Maybe some of you have been to the Lincoln Memorial, and think about the second inaugural address given basically as the Civil War was winding down, and the loving thoughts expressed there, such that it's an inspiration to all who visit that almost sacred place, and then think of others these days who are doing everything they can just to grab power for themselves. They seem like very, very small compared to the breadth of soul of a Lincoln. Later, says the Tibetan, as evolution proceeded and desire shifted from one planned satisfaction to another, remember that the third ray of intelligence is also the ray of planning. When you add third ray to sixth ray, you can make desire more effective. It began to take on a less physical aspect. That's what I've been, excuse me, that's what I've been trying to drive at here. It became less wedded to the body per se. It began, that is, desire began, to take on a less physical aspect, and men sought pleasure in emotional experience and its dramatization. Now, it takes us even back to the days of Hercules, who was a great first-rate soul, but at the same time a dramatist who wrote stories that were enacted in order to demonstrate the progress of the soul to those who were not thinking verbally, but they could relate to the dramatization that he put forward, and of course the Greek tragedies as well, and the comedies. Some of them had much okay, well, that came right back. I had my usual dropping of the keyboard. Anyway, the Greek chorus and the rhythmic, hypnotic intonations of the Greek chorus, that reaches people in a different way than just the verbal outreach. So the detachment of desire from the strictly physical aspect, emotional experience, and its dramatization. We see a lot of that today. I mean, the people that are in the field of acting, and many of them in the arts, are involved in this kind of thing. They have very strong emotions. DK says the artist has a strong astral body, and then finding a way to externalize it. And then DK goes on to say, this led to the establishment of the drama as its first artistic expression. And by means of this, down the ages, man has supplemented individual emotional and dramatic living with a vicarious emergence, submergence in it, thus exteriorizing himself and supplementing his personal dramas, desires, and objectives, which were developed by means of the creative imagination, thus laying the foundation for the recognition, intelligent and real, of the part in relation to the whole. Now that's quite a paragraph there. And anyway, the drama is the first artistic expression. And when you look at Masonry, in a way, there's much of that dramatization going on, because certain of the types in Masonry learn best by witnessing the Masonic dramas, we might call it. So began to take on a less physical aspect. We expect that the focus will change as we evolve, and we'll move up the ladder of refinement within the personality. Establishment of the drama as the first artistic expression. And the labors of Hercules are all part of that. And then, somehow in doing this, man has supplemented, given additional material to individual, emotional, and dramatic living with a vicarious submergence in it. Well, you go to a great play, and it's not yours what's happening, but you are caught up through a kind of identification with the dramatic situation which the actors are presenting. And thus, the man is exteriorizing himself and supplementing his personal dramas and desires and objectives, with those that are developed or were developed by means of the creative imagination. Thus, and this is an interesting one, thus laying the foundation for the recognition, intelligent and real, of the part in relation to the whole. It's a very expansive paragraph, and supplementation through the creative imagination. You know, sometimes you might say, well, that play or the situation in it was, to me, more real than life itself. I remember many things about getting caught up in dramas. I was once on an airplane and very, very caught by the film that was going on. So caught that when people were standing up oblivious to it and in my way, I said so to them. And I was not at all pleased with their rudeness, and in fact, it was I, perhaps, who could not be detached and was being rude accordingly. I've seen quite a number of plays of that kind, and maybe operas and so forth. My whole first part of my life was spent in music and opera, and I just remember really being caught up in what was being represented. Intelligent real. But this is the metaphysical part. The metaphysical part laying the foundation for the recognition of the part in relation to the whole. Maybe we wouldn't expect that of a drama. Maybe if we thought about it, we would expect it. Shakespeare had said, man struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is seen no more. It's Macbeth, out, out, brief candle. It's at the death of Lady Macbeth that Macbeth gives that evaluation about the poor player man, here today, gone tomorrow, strutting, fretting a brief time. Well, that's how some people do see things. And when we're caught up in the drama of life, without the esoteric understanding, that is often how we see things. But this business of the part in relation to the whole, our tiny little part, what was it? Alexander Pope? Was his first name Alexander? I think so. English poet. It had to do with the idea that act well thy part, there all the honor lies. Think about that in relation to your assistance with the divine plan. Thus, the Tibetan says, from the earliest Atlantean times, well, we're going to go back 12 million years ago at least, the foundation was laid for the unfoldment of the sense of mystical duality through the various stages of an anthropomorphic recognition of deity. In other words, God is a person, the old man with the white beard, etc. But that anthropomorphism is more deeply rooted. It means taking on the form of man, right? Morphic is form and anthro is man. The foundation was laid about through the various stages of an anthropomorphic recognition of deity to the recognition finally, of the real in man himself, until we arrive at the proposition which faces the disciple. Then the dweller on the threshold confronts the angel of the presence, and the last and major conflict is fought out. Okay. But early Atlantean times, mystical duality through anthropomorphic recognition of deity, which is not what deity is at all, but it sufficed. That kind of evaluation sufficed for the period. Okay. And then the big battle, in which I'm sure many of us, in different ways, and maybe not entirely completely, but sufficiently, find ourselves absorbed. This dualistic consciousness culminates at the time of the third initiation in a final fight between the pairs of opposites and the triumphant victory, think of Scorpio, the triumphant victory of the angel, the embodiment of the forces of good in an individual, in a group, and in humanity. Then dualism and the desire for that which is material and not oneself, as identified with the whole, dies out. Unity and life more abundantly is achieved, certainly begins to be achieved. So he gives us the whole story, and however long it may take. In the final fight between the pairs of opposites and the triumphant victory of the angel, we go from a dualistic consciousness to the type of consciousness characterized by the three letters M-O-N, monad, monk, mono, meaning one. And who is the angel? The good, wherever it shows up. And even if it's in its projection as the angel of the presence. The dualism and the desire for that which is material and not oneself, as identified with the whole, dies out, and unity and life more abundantly is achieved. Well, at least it begins, because the real life more abundantly is an Aquarian factor and has to do with Shambhala. I'm not going to go any further. You'll be happy to know. And we are on page something, 204, I guess, page 204. And I'll just kind of go up here and see if I can, well, just our usual 2 pages, I guess. 202 and 204. No, it should have been here. 204 and beginning next time on 204. Not entirely easy to understand, but let's just say sufficiently simplified by all the Tibetans' angles of explanation, so that it should not be impossible to understand. So we have finished, apparently. Whoop. Now it's just
there you go. You got yourself out of it.
I did, because Michael taught me all about escape last night. Of course, I've known that such a button exists, I just didn't know its utility. So anyway, this is the end of 188 and 124, and now we'll be beginning with 189, I guess. Let's see. Am I correct in what I'm doing now? What is today anyway?
Yes, you're correct in what you're doing, but I think you can remove the beginning of, because I think you have that also below.
Oh, is there? Well, is there anything below?
See, next meeting, 17 December.
Okay. We have it. Okay, good. Very good.
Okay, beginning on page 204.
Page 2 of beginning. Okay. And
then that will be program 189.
Okay. And
reading 124.
Reading 125. Won't it be? It's usually 4 away.
You had one that had no reading.
Oh.
So
well, okay. The last one, though, I thought was 124, the one we just ended. Was that not correct?
The one we just ended was 188, reading 124.
Yeah, so now the next one will be 125.
Right.
Yep.
There you go. No, okay. You don't have the 5 there yet.
No, but it's coming.
There you go.
Okay, very good.
That's good.
I'm still on the tracks. Okay. All right, friends, so I'll... BL will have this, and Harold and Joe, and whatever Michael does with it, I'm not quite sure, but something for this type of program. And I think that's it. So now we've been going for about an hour, and do you have anything you'd like to say about what we've been discussing, either what the Tibetan has said or the inserts that I have sometimes suggested? Anything that comes to your mind?
Yes, Leslie asked you a question a little earlier on. She wanted to know if was the channeling in Hitler's circle done by Maria Orsic.
Okay, well, the channeling I was talking about was a World War I channeling. And I can't remember. I mean, you may have looked it up. I'm not remembering the name of the channel. I just know that she was much sought after and apparently convinced the top brass to which she was channeling that she was channeling the great star Aldebaran. Well, if you think about it, so I would have to look that up, but maybe you have looked it up. Yeah.
She also asks if it was the VRIL group.
Okay, that I just don't know. I just don't know. But I do, but it's the general idea there that people in the high ranks of the military were so glamorously misled by a claimant of preposterous things. Now, we're lucky, you and I, if we channel our own soul instead of our subconscious mind. And a lot of people who are not involved in the intelligent pursuit of occultism are in worse shape. So I guess maybe it's quite natural for them to believe, oh yeah, she's channeling Aldebaran, but someone else is channeling Betelgeuse. I mean, these are huge entities we're talking about among the royal stars. At least Aldebaran is. So just common sense of a fairly well-trained esoteric student or student of esotericism would warn away from that stuff. But no, it became an exciting thing. And it became as if truth. And who knows what damage it did on the battlefield and in general in the conduct of the war. It certainly contributed to a sense of exaltation among some of the leading military people. So yes, you may be correct, but I would have to go searching, which I'll just leave that to you and to others. I have no time right now. I just know the general layout of the event. Okay.
Okay, and then Anne says, could you say a little more about the period of recognizing our own glamours and being horrified? Maybe tell us where that falls on the path of initiation.
Well, it was true of Alice Bailey and the Tibetan. And he said it may have been a long time since I succumbed to any glamour, and a shorter time since AAB did, but we're both horrified. So when could that be? And it's not going to be before there is a mental focus, even mental polarization, with the mind held steady in the light. So you have to be at least a disciple of some standing, not necessarily a third-degree initiate, but a probationary disciple of some standing in order to really begin to recognize your glamours. And you have to have, excuse me, that kind of mental polarization where the mind, aided by the love of the soul, is taking over the usual emotional response. A person who is the victim of emotional glamours but does not have that mental disciplic focus centering around the second initiation, maybe, when the Antikarana is being built and so forth, is just not going to be able to say, ah, yes, now I see. I was deluded. I didn't see it before. Yes, it looks like I have been the victim of X, Y, or Z. So in my opinion, anyway, which is all it is, it would help to be an accepted disciple. It would help to be under the master's supervision. It would help to be a kind of individual who had, well, what can I say, a mental outlook on life, but not just a cold, hard, brittle, dry mental outlook, but one that is characteristic of the soul-infused mind, which is characteristic of the initiate, pending the initiate of the second degree. So I would say around the period of the second degree, and remember how important Mercury is at that second degree, when you can really begin building the Antikarana in the manner that DK suggested. That very mental planet involved with the abstract mind and also with pure reason. So Mercury gets into the act and certainly helps. I would say there's not one of us here, if we are persistent, who cannot recognize some of the glamours to which we are prone, especially as maybe people we live with or around us are only too ready to remind us about things that we don't see in ourselves. And sometimes I say, hey, well, we have a PIP test, personal identity profile, and why don't you have someone who knows you well take the PIP for you, as it were, their impressions of you, and maybe you'll see something that you didn't see as vividly. I had a person do this who knew me quite well, and I came out to be quite a fanatic, which I had not, at least in their eyes, I had not judged myself to be quite so much along that line. But that's how they saw me, and maybe I found that helpful. I think it's kind of amusing, too. When their taking of the PIP corresponds with your taking of the PIP, then we may be nearer to truth in both cases, that they have a sharp eye and you have been truthful about yourself. So anyway, you can begin now.
Okay. Yeah, we all can. Mary says, Dear Michael, I'm reflecting on the discernment between lower desire of glamour, Scorpio to the aspiration to the light in Sagittarius, as the phoenix, without attachment or aversion, but in beingness, living, embracing compassionately, and being able to be in awe with art and beauty in service to humanity, not to the attachment of the personality.
Yes, there are higher arts, definitely. It's not to say that when we encounter art, we have some low thing. As a matter of fact, DK is promising for us a new renaissance under the monadic aspect of the fourth ray, which is coming in around the year 2025. So even though there are ways of escaping through what we normally call art or a television drama or whatever, if you've ever had the fortune or misfortune of looking at some of the soap operas, they're not exactly the highest in terms of art, and they're very, very personal, but they're, as Master Moria says, in one transport of art. I'm not going to say it right, but the idea is that art transports you rapidly into a realm which transcends, and this I think I have right, the cerebral sinuosity of the brain. So there are ways of really respecting the way art has of sensitizing the individual. And frequently, DK uses the word art rather than science. Once the knowledge of science has been learned, it can be applied intuitively, artistically. So let's just say that there are these higher forms. Do we become the phoenix? We can, as we pass the burning grounds, because there's an incineration of old obstacles on the burning grounds, at least before the first 3 initiations. And because of that, we can fly much freer. Is there a higher type of phoenix? I think there is. I think that what happens is you pass the ascension initiation at the 6th degree, as the Christ did when he, so to speak, disappeared into a cloud, which is all that his disciples could imagine had happened, and went as the 7th degree Chohan to sit at the right hand of the Father, symbolically speaking. Now that is a phoenix-like arising into as high a position on the cosmic physical plane as may be possible. And he holds very close to that very high position on the cosmic physical plane, being a member of the council at Shambhala. So you can interpret arts, sciences, ascension, elevation. You can interpret all these things from a lower perspective or a higher perspective. Let's just try to be clear about which one we're using and when. Okay?
Okay, I hadn't really finished reading it. She went on to say, could you highlight the discernment here? But I think you actually did that. So I'm pretty sure that covers what she was asking.
Yep.
And then Yvonne put in there to everyone that page 120 of the Glamour book is where the glamors are for all the different rays. If
Yeah,
anyone
that's
wanted to look that up.
that all starts. He, obviously he hasn't mentioned all. He came up with many unique glamors for the students to whom he was informing about their glamors. But at least it was a very good start. And like I say, you may be able to do this quite on your own, but when you have the help of truly honest associates, then maybe what they say can be additionally helpful in pointing out your own individual glamors. we have to assume that, we still have them, even though they might be quite high in a certain sense. I mean, we might say, why did the rich young man of the third degree go sadly away, having fulfilled so very much, yet he went sadly away when the Christ said to him, take all you have, give it to the poor, or sell it, and take the proceeds and give them to the poor, and then the clincher, follow me. And that was at a high point, and what shall we call it? A glamour, an illusion. He kind of had the glamour of the sufficient adequacy of the causal body. And we all know from what happens to the causal body, egoic lotus, that it does not remain sufficient forever. Now, it may be, a number of lives ahead before we really experience that, but it does not serve forever. There are other and higher states that have to take its place. Okay.
Okay, Yvonne goes on to ask, where are they located in your book, Tapestry of the Gods?
Maybe someone knows.
I can look it up in a minute here.
If they're there. I'm not sure that I dealt particularly and in a condensed manner with glamour. Maybe I did. It's been a long time since I wrote that book.
Michael, this is not a criticism, but there is nothing in Tapestry that's in a condensed manner.
About nothing that's what, dear? What?
Condensed.
Oh, nothing condensed.
It's
all
quite
expanded.
descriptive.
It's all expanded, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I'm sure I mentioned foibles for many combinations. I just don't know if I've put them together in glamour lists. Maybe somehow, somewhere in there.
I'll look. I can do a search on the PDF on the word glamour and see what pops up.
Okay.
Okay. Martine says, glamour of continuous frustration in the constant failure to achieve the fullest expression of your spiritual aims and goals. She says, Dinah 2, page 601, to a disciple.
Yeah, I wonder if it's to DLR, or if you flip back to where it starts in volume 2, what's the name of the disciple? Or does it just say brother of mine or something like that? I think you said 601. Well, there was this one disciple that was constantly frustrated by circumstance. He just got involved in such petty little things that it rather overwhelmed him. And then, of course, the fear of failure, of carrying out one's mission. Of course, sometimes the idea that one has a special destiny can be a Ray 1 glamour, but it does sound like the man who was really quite a high probationary initiate. I would say he was pushing through the second degree, was my estimation of him, and he was thwarted again and again by his surroundings. I'm sure, it's not uncommon. So many of us say, oh, if only I had the time to do this, that, or the other, but I'm so involved in what I have to do, karmically or dharmically or in some other way. I just have to do these things. They're not really what I want to do, but I have to do them. And if only I didn't, then I could really fulfill myself. But sometimes that is actually an untruth. If we look at the Gemini labor of Hercules, poor Hercules, he was always being stopped every time he thought he was getting near the golden apples of the Hesperides. He found he had something else to do, whether it was going to be to free Prometheus or to help Atlas or to fight Antaeus. He had difficult chores that he says, this is leading me away from the golden apples, when in fact it was precisely because of his sacrifice leading him to the golden apples. So sometimes when we are, I'm trying to listen to myself talk because, I think I'm the victim of this one. Sometimes when we think that we're being stopped from what our real destiny is, we're actually being led to it by working on the karma and the duty, both Saturn things, that stand between us and the selflessness it requires to receive the golden apples of wisdom. And that's sometimes a hard lesson to learn. You get really frustrated. I don't want to do this. Why do I have to do this and not that? And yet I have to do this. Well, that might have to do with the sense of responsibility. And DK says the very first indication that the soul is really taking control is to fulfill responsibility, even though it's annoying at times. Okay.
Sorry, I'm just putting the link to Tapestry.
Is there something?
You mention it a number of times, and I mean, you literally list the glamour of this or the glamour of that. I found 36 occurrences in volume 1 and 20 occurrences in volume 2. Then someone said they don't have the book. So, but
Okay.
the book is available on Makara. I've put the link in there for you for the direct Makara, for the main index. And they're on the top right hand, volume 1 and volume 2. You can download them in PDF. It's very easy to download them and find them. Okay, now let me see. It was RSU was the disciple in Dyna 2, page 601. Somebody look that up for us. Thank you.
Okay, well, that's another important disciple. And what did it say of her? That she was Alice Bailey's right-hand person. She was the main editor of the books, and she probably had many trivial things to do. And she dreamt of liberation. And finally, a kind of liberation came to her as she was transferred back into her own true ashram which was that of Master Kutumi. And, this means certainly that she was in the area or beyond the second degree. It's the status of a disciple is pretty much between that disciple and the master, but there are indications, and she was a high-achieving disciple who had her own issues, difficult issues, because it was all about, for her, Judaism. She was born in the Jewish group, but DK assured her that for many lives she had been not in the Jewish group, and this was just a temporary landing. But she identified so strongly with it that she made some big mistakes in terms of the overall teaching, and became hypersensitive on matters in relation to which she could have had more detachment. And Alice Bailey could have taught her that, and probably tried to do so. But there was a stubborn streak within her, and later she realized her errors, but for quite a while she was under that spell. But she was a high disciple. She was, and also one of the ones in the telepathic seed group, which had, I think, very abstruse instruction. The more I go through that book, the more I realize the Tibetan is really searching for words to convey something that is not at all easy for him to convey with words. So RSU or DLR, they were both high disciples, and the story of RSU is very it's a very interesting story. I think what do our letters stand for? I know the first one is restraint.
They gave you that. Hold on a minute.
R is
I have to go up. Restraint, strength, understanding.
Yeah. Okay.
They had typed that into the chat.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. Yeah, restraint, and I don't know which one was italicized. I'd have to go hunting, but part of her difficulty was, I guess, that she was impulsive and needed to hold back in places where she was prone to act in ways that were maybe not best for the group. Yeah.
Restraint was the one that was italicized.
Yeah. Just like Alice Bailey, skill in action, I think, was the one. I think so. Maybe you could tell me different. Alice Bailey was DSR, was it? Detachment, DRS, rest and skill in action.
Right, and detachment was the one italicized for her.
That's the italicized one. Well, you wouldn't know it. Good thing she had a good Gemini sense of humor. So the story goes about her. Yeah. Okay, friends.
Anne says, your story of Hercules and the Golden Apples reminds me of my favorite movie, It's a Wonderful Life, with Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah. That's about Christmas time back in the 30s, isn't it? And I've probably seen snippets of that movie, but probably he concludes at the end, "It's a Wonderful Life." It's a bit like that movie about the man who basically saved his son during the concentration camp experience, and it's called "Life is Beautiful." Or, yeah, I think that's what it was. He had to go through all kinds of terrible things, but he did manage to reunite the son with the mother, both of whom survived, whereas he did not. Okay.
Anne says the movie It's a Wonderful Life is he wants to travel the world, but his family's circumstances keep him in his small town.
Uh-huh. Okay, well, that's it. You know, and
Okay,
that's what, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, Alice
That's
Bailey
all.
says, yeah. I'm sorry, Bill, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to tell you that's all I see in the way of comments or hands, but
Okay. Well, she says, look, don't go out and save the world until you've fulfilled Bethlehem. So, you know, from Bethlehem to Calvary. It's a wonderful book for Christians who are on the brink of a possible transition. Well, you know, Alice Bailey, from her Christian background, was able to write in a way that could be understood. So if you have friends who are there and have been very much committed to the Christian way, but are looking for something deeper, from Bethlehem to Calvary is the book for them, or at least one of the books. Yeah, go ahead, BL. Was there anything else?
No, there's nothing else.
Okay.
Except we do need to see the meditation when we get ready to do that.
Oh, I forgot about that. Goodness. How could I do that? It's going to be a long one tonight, folks. But sorry. The Glamour of Personality. Well, you know, I won't take forever with this meditation. And let's see, is this it? Is that what's coming up? The Glamour?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, that's it. Okay, and I assume, thanks for reminding me, I would have gone blissfully forward and saying, well, we had a nice night, and it's a lot easier to make comment on glamors than it is on pure being. But hang in there, and you never know what might come across your consciousness. So we have 30 of us here, approximately. I'm not going to go through the naming of everyone, but the glamour of personality is what we're dealing with. And we can't, when you do this with your own groups, you can afford the naming of the group members. Maybe they do it themselves, followed by 10 minutes of silence. We can't do that right now. So we have a protective formula, and we can visualize the cross, forehead, heart, left eye, right eye, as we use the protective formula. As a soul, I work in light, and darkness cannot touch me. I take my stand within the light. I work, and from that point, I never move. Tracing light. And we made, he's calling this the cross of divinity. Now, the preparatory stages involve light. We're focusing the dual light of matter and mind, one that has a lot to do with the etheric and physical natures, matter, and then the light of logic and reason in the usual customary mind, which is, for most, the concrete mind. So we focus the two, and then we establish soul contact, and we do our best to recognize soul light. And we fuse the two lesser lights with the imagined, at least, light of the soul, bringing it down till we have a triple light. We try to feel the reality of that. And on the signal, or right away, we say together, the light is one, and in that light shall we see light. This is the light that turns the darkness into day. Om. 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 So we are working with light. And then we use the formula and visualization along with it, trying to make this as real to ourselves as we can. Radiance are we, and power. We stand forever with our hands stretched out, linking the heavens and the earth, the inner world of meaning and the subtle world of glamour. We reach into the light and bring it down to meet the need. We reach into the silent place and bring from thence the gift of understanding. And thus, with the light we work and turn the darkness into day. And we visualize the great searchlight that we've been creating and turn that light upon the astral plane. And the many little beams form, as it were, one beam. For the group dissipation of glamour, in this case, the glamour of personality. And then we invoke the spiritual will, a willingness to do what soul, triad, spirit, and even the great council, to the extent we can fathom it, even what they wish to see done, even what the planetary logos wishes to see done. And then, using the strength of the atmic spiritual will, we say together, with power upon its beam, the light is focused on the goal. The detection and dissipation of the glamour of personality. Which is a very separative and confining glamour. And yet we find it everywhere. looking out for number one, as it were. It's not looking out for oneness, it's looking out for number one. And we use this list of the words of power the power of our united light prevents the appearance of the glamour of personality. And since many people are not even into the personality fully yet, we have a ways to go, we know. The power of our united light negates the quality of the glamour of personality from affecting humanity. And that quality, of course, kind of an emotional separateness, and a care for oneself above all. The power of our united light destroys the life behind the glamour of personality. So there's insufficient energy to sustain it, and the energy is directed elsewhere and taken away from the sustainment of the obstacle of the unaligned personality. So, in our 5 minutes of silence, we will visualize the light penetrating into the glamour in 3 different ways, producing its weakening and its dissipation. 5 minutes of silence and intensity of purpose whilst the work is seen proceeding. So let's get into that. We have found the glamour. We have weakened the glamour. And the sun symbolically stands in place of where glamour existed. The appearance of the sun of the soul, the sun of soul living, the appearance of a quality of unity rather than separateness, emotional separateness, the appearance of the strength to sustain the good and not the energy which normally sustains the glamour. And so we are ready then to withdraw our beam back onto the mental plane, and we turn our attention away from the astral plane. And we call it the searchlight of the soul, and we shut that off, and the light is reapportioned to where it came from. And we'll all sound the Om to indicate that some little bit at least of work has been done in combating this glamour of absorption into the rebellious personality. We do continue to work along this line, and in another couple of weeks we'll be working as a group, which does not mean that you cannot work meanwhile as an individual, especially as we are once again re-entering that section of the book where the individual glamors are discussed in detail. So all of us on the communications team here, BL and Mikhail and Harold and Joe and Michael, Stacy, and often Frederick, we wish you very best. Tui and I also join in, and Olivia, who had a special role in getting these glamour group works started. Yes, we're grateful, and we will sign off now. Tomorrow morning, check your schedule, because I think we have the new moon, so I can't go digging for it right now. And Michael, if you would be so kind to wait for...
No.
Don't we? Tomorrow morning? That's Saturday? Someone said...
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. It's at 7:10 a.m.
Okay. Yeah, okay, so that's going to be the new moon work. And then at night we'll have the EUN, Esoteric United Nations. Michael, if you can kind of hang on here for a minute, or maybe like 5-10 minutes,
Yep.
I will be back. And wishing all of you many blessings in every way. So I'll let Michael turn things off, and